We're living in a golden age of cinema cameras where the differences between top-end Hollywood cameras and the systems available to independent creators are getting smaller and smaller every year. Now with cameras like the Sony FX line or the Canon C line or the pocket cameras from Blackmagic or any of the other options out there, smaller creators can get their hands on high-end camera bodies that aren't exactly cheap, but at least they're not going to cost you the same as a down payment on a house. But once you get that camera body, you're only part of the way to getting the most out of it. Apart from the camera and lens, there are some key accessories that I've found over the years seriously expand the capabilities of your camera rig. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. 4 accessories that will help you turn your camera body into a super powerful documentary shooting rig. At the end, I'll give my opinion on which one I think is the most important, where I'd start on a limited budget, and as a bonus, I'm going to share my favorite, very cheap trick for mounting audio accessories to my rig that I use on every single shoot. Okay, let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Luke Forsyth, and on this channel, I teach the skills I've learned over 10 years working as a documentary filmmaker and photographer. If that sounds like something you're into, make sure to hit the subscribe button because I post new videos every week. It's kind of hard to know sometimes what qualifies as a cinema camera these days. And before I get into my favorite accessories, I also want to take a second to clarify what I mean when I talk about a camera rig versus just a camera. For me personally, a camera doesn't become a real rig until you can get it up onto your shoulder and keep it there. Now I like shooting from the hip or the chest as much as the next person, but in my opinion, you always get the best results from shooting up here on the shoulder. It's more stable and the movement you get is more fluid than when you're holding it with just your hands. You can get amazing results shooting in a lot of different ways, but when I say a camera rig, I mean something that at least can be shoulder operated. It doesn't mean that you can't still shoot from the hip when the scene calls for it or hold it out in front of you. I shoot my FX9 in all 3 positions, but if you can't get the camera onto your shoulder at all, it's gonna limit your shooting style. Try filming for an hour straight with a 20-pound camera held out in front of you like this. Tell me how long it takes for your arms to start going numb. I regularly have to operate on interviews that can easily go twice that long, and I wouldn't want to have to do that from here. With a shoulder-mounted camera, you'll definitely still get tired, but you can generally keep it in position for a lot longer. My main camera is this, the Sony FX9, but no matter what the job is, I always rig it in pretty much the same way. Even if I turn up to a job and they want me to shoot on a different kind of camera, I can use the same accessories. None of this stuff is camera specific. So what are they? My FX9 has an amazing 6K full frame sensor that shoots log footage with crazy dynamic range, and having resolution like that is great, but it creates a problem because if your shots are out of focus, even by a little bit, it's super obvious and the shots are pretty much unusable in my opinion. 1080 used to be a bit forgiving if you were off by a little bit, but these days you 100% need to nail your focus every time. But for some reason, the monitor that ships with the camera is about 2 inches wide, and even with the peaking turned up to max, I'm never quite sure that I'm focused on the right thing when shooting wide open. Sony also includes this cheap plasticky loop thing that makes it a little bit easier to see, but the design is a little chunky and it feels really cheap for a camera that's worth more than my car. That's why I always ditch the stock monitor and replace it with this thing, which is a small HD 502 ultra bright monitor. I've had this thing for years now, and I think it's been obsoleted by the 503, but this one is still working great, and I don't really see a reason to change it now. It's a lightweight 5-inch screen with false color, histograms, LUT support, and all the other bells and whistles you could ever need. But most importantly for me, it's really sharp and the focus peaking helps me to nail the focus every time. Now this monitor isn't cheap and the new model costs around $1,700 before tax, so it's not a small investment by any means, especially when there are a lot of other companies out there like Andy Cine or Lilliput or Portkeys or whatever, putting out similarly sized monitors for just a few $100s. But trust me, not all monitors are created equal, and there's a reason this one costs as much as it does. I recently bought a 7-inch Andy Cine monitor for my FX3 because I was having such a hard time focusing with the stock monitor, and decided to save some money by going with the cheaper one. But even though the screen is big enough and bright enough, and it might work well for basic framing and reference, as a working focus monitor, it's pretty bad. I tried a bunch of settings with the focus peaking, and I've never been able to find a configuration that I actually feel confident in, and as soon as I tried it out, I regretted not waiting until I could afford a better one. This isn't an ad for Small HD, and they're not paying me anything, and there are other brands like TV Logic is also really good that can make a great monitor. but this one has been amazing for me, and so it's the one I'm gonna recommend. The motto of this channel will always be to get what you can afford and use it, and I don't want anyone to think that they need a $2,000 monitor before they can tell a story. But if you can swing it, the better monitor is absolutely worth the money in my opinion. And a monitor should last across multiple camera systems, so getting one with decent build quality will probably save you money in the long run. These small HDs are tough and light and they just work, so they'd probably be my first choice. But like I said, I've also used ones from TV Logic that work well. I'll link to both in the description. If these monitors seem outrageously expensive, there are tons of budget manufacturers out there. But I'll be honest, like I said, I haven't had the greatest experience with those. I tried out the one from Andy Cine that I mentioned this summer, and it was so hard to use that I eventually stopped using it entirely. So this is one accessory for me where the extra money does make a difference. I've had this small HD monitor for almost 6 years now, so for me, it's totally been worth it. Most external monitors these days can run off batteries like the Canon LP or the Sony NPFs, but unless you get really big ones, they tend to run out of power quickly. And once you put a giant NPF battery on the back of the monitor, things start to get really heavy and unbalanced. With that in mind, the next accessory I'd add to my rig solves this problem by adding a ton of power options while also helping to balance the camera for steadier shots. I'm talking about batteries. The stock batteries that came with my FX9 are decent and actually last quite a while, but what I really needed out of a battery was the ability to power external accessories. And for that, you need either V-mounts or gold mounts because they have these things, D-tap ports. D-tap ports, sometimes called P-tap ports, are standardized ports that you can power a ton of different things with, like monitors or EVFs or wireless systems like a Teradek. The only real difference between V-mount and gold mount is the shape of the connection. Like you can see this one is shaped like a little V. And you could really just pick whichever one you like. It won't make any difference to the size of the battery. A lot of people say gold mounts are sturdier connections and less likely to fall off, but V-mounts are slightly faster and easier to pop on and off. I personally went with V-mounts and I haven't ever had one fall off, but do your own research and pick whichever one you feel most comfortable with. Just be consistent and stick with one connection and they'll power both your camera and external monitor for hours. On top of that, cinema rigs have a tendency to be really front heavy, especially once you start adding monitors and big lenses. And it can get actually really hard to hold it steady over a long day. But putting a V-mount or gold mount system on your rig, it actually adds a little weight, which is a good thing. It shifts the balance point of the camera backwards so it doesn't tip forward so much. It can be a huge relief on your wrists and make for steadier shots all around, so that's an added bonus. Lastly, you can use them to power other things than your camera. A lot of lights, like any of Aputure's popular ones like the 300D or 120D or my Westcott flex panels, can run on wall power or V-mount batteries. You can power a ton of other things with them too, like director's monitors or audio gear. The ones I have also have a USB port, so I can use them to power a stills camera or a GoPro, or even just to recharge my phone. They'll power recharge almost anything in my kit, and I've used them on every shoot I've been on for the last 5 years. Just pick either V-mount or gold mount and stick with them, and you'll never run out of power again. You can get these batteries in a bunch of different capacities, and some of them are massive, but if you plan on shooting documentaries and think you might need to take them on a plane one day, make sure you stick to ones that are under 98 watt hours so they don't get blocked by customs. I use IDX98s as my main battery and I love them, but there are a lot of other manufacturers. Once you get up to about 6 to 8 of them, you can power pretty much anything you need and not worry about running out even on those massively long shoot days. To get them running on most camera systems, you'll need some sort of battery plate adapter as well. There are a bunch of options out there. I personally use this one from Shape that mounts directly to the back of my camera, but I know Wooden Camera also makes a good one, and I'm sure there are a lot of other brands that will work for you too. You'll also most likely need a dummy D-tap power adapter to power your monitor. All of these extras, not to mention the hard cost of the batteries, add up fast, but the sooner you get all your gear running from the same battery type, the easier it will be to keep everything charged and working at the end of a shoot. But even with bigger batteries on the back of your rig, with a monitor, lens, and shotgun mic all pointing forwards, odds are it's still going to be front heavy. To keep things steady and secure, the third accessory I'd consider a must-have is some sort of grip. I personally think these shape arms are the best engineered handles out there, and the way they adjust with just a push of a button is so much better than anything else I found. The FX9 does ship with its own handle and grip, but it's way harder to adjust than the Shape ones. You have to unscrew and twist these knobs and tighten them every time, and when you're holding the camera, it's not very easy to do. Compare that to the Shape, which is just push and turn, and over the course of the day, changing shooting positions and moving the handle so you can put the camera down on the ground, that's gonna save you a ton of time, and fiddling around might cost you the shot, or your sanity. The downside of these is that they're both expensive and heavy, but for the build quality and ease of use, I'd say they're worth it. This is another item that I've had across 3 camera systems so far, and I'm pretty sure it's gonna be working well after I've stopped shooting. It's so over-engineered, I actually had a customs guy at the airport try and take it from me once because he was concerned it could be used as a weapon. So you can be confident it's not gonna break on you. You'll also need a rosette mounting point somewhere to attach this thing to your rig. The FX9 has one built right into the body, but most other cameras you might need to add these with either a VCT base plate or a cage or maybe a rail mounted rosette. Just go on B&H and search for the name of your camera plus rosette, and you'll see a ton of options at all different price ranges. While we're on the topic of ways to hold your camera, the 4th thing on this list is in the same category, and that's the top handle. There's nothing wrong with the top handle that comes with most cinema cameras these days, but for me, there are a few good reasons to switch it out for a third-party one like this. The first for me is because it makes it so much easier to mount my monitor by adding the ability to clamp onto a 15mm rail. I can just use this lightweight rod and NATO rail thing made by Wooden Camera, stick the rod into the handle, clamp it down, and it stays put. Some high-end cinema cameras have stock handles that allow this, but a lot don't. The second reason is because it makes your camera more durable and less susceptible to rain and water damage. The top handles on most cinema cameras are connected to the camera with an electronic connection, but they're not usually that well weather sealed. Once I was shooting a doc about bats in Kenya and I had to wear a hazmat suit while filming. I was sweating so much that every time I held my arms at the sides to carry the camera, sweat would literally pour out the bottom of the sleeve and all over the top handle. After a couple days of shooting like this, my old camera, a Sony FS7, shut off and never turned back on. I tried 3 times to get it repaired, but it never worked properly again. By removing the handle, you can seal up the electronic contact point, and in my opinion, it makes the camera much safer to use in bad weather. Finally, it's just so much easier to take on and off. The one I use just attaches to this cheap NATO rail from Small Rig, and when I want to take it off, I just twist one knob and it's done. To take the handle off the Sony, you need an Allen key, and when you travel as much as I do and you're constantly packing and repacking for flights, being able to get this thing off without tools is really convenient. The downside is that you need to lose the hot shoe and whatever buttons are built into the stock handle. I personally don't use the hot shoe for anything, and I never use the top handle record button or zoom rocker anyways, so it wasn't really a big deal for me. If you use those lav mics that need a hot shoe connection, I could see this being a deal breaker, but it hasn't been an issue for me, and the strength, packability, and mounting options of the Wooden Camera handle are totally worth it. There are also other options from Small Rig and other companies that are way cheaper, and I'm sure they'll work almost as well. So those are the first 4 accessories I'd get for my camera rig to turn it into a documentary shoulder shooting beast. Of all the things, I'd probably say to prioritize the monitor first, because like I said, with resolutions getting higher and higher, it is so important to nail your focus. I also use the false color, histograms, and waveforms a lot, and most of the stock viewfinders just don't compare with features. Oh, and before I forget, the super secret bonus tip for today is also conveniently the cheapest by a long shot. When you get to the point when you're shooting docs with a fully built up cinema rig like this, chances are you'll be using lav mics on almost every shoot, or maybe even working with a professional sound guy who's gonna want to attach mics and timecode boxes to your camera. There are all kinds of weird brackets and magic arms out there for this, but they just add weight and can be annoyingly expensive. Luckily, there's a hack that weighs next to nothing and doesn't cost much at all, and that's Velcro. I always keep a roll of industrial strength adhesive Velcro at my camera bench, and I also like to put it on the back of all my batteries, and then also on top of the rig itself. Then I put the opposite side on all my audio accessories like the backs of lavs or timecode generators, and when I need to use them, I just stick them on the back. The Velcro is easily strong enough to hold them there all day, and I've never had to replace it. I learned this working from sound guys, and a lot of them will put Velcro on anything they might need to attach to a camera. In fact, it's so common that these timecode boxes from Tentacle that I use actually ship with the Velcro built right into the design. Just make sure you keep it consistent and put the softer side or the loop side on the camera, because you always put the hooks or the hard side on the accessories. So get some Velcro going and you'll be able to put audio stuff all over your rig without adding much bulk or weight. I'll put a link in the description to the stuff I use, but just get one roll and it will last you a very long time. I personally love hacks like this, so let me know in the comments what you think of putting Velcro all over your rig, or if you have any other crazy uses for it that I might not have thought of. Okay, so there are the 4 first accessories I'd add to my cinema camera for shoulder rig doc shooting. You can absolutely tell an amazing story without a huge shoulder rig, and there are lots of situations where you might want to use something much smaller. You can get great results with a far smaller build than this, But in my experience, when you start getting into the world of professional doc shoots, most crews will be using a shoulder rig system of some kind. If you're more into making your own passion projects, then by all means shoot with whatever works for you. But if in the long run, you plan to get hired to shoot for a big production company on a high budget doc, you might want to think about building up your own rig over time because they're still the industry standard. That's it for today's video. I hope it was helpful and that it gave you some ideas on how to build out your own doc rig down the road. There's no perfect way to do it, and let me know if you do things differently down in the comments. But after working with dozens of different crews all around the world, I can say that most high-end doc shooters will use a rig setup that's pretty similar to this one. As always, build up slowly and remember that story trumps gear, but gear still does matter, and when you're eventually grown into a rig like this, you'll be able to use it on pretty much any documentary shoot out there. If you like that video, maybe give it a like or think about subscribing to the channel so I know it's working for future videos. And if you did like that, maybe check out this other video I made about 5 things filmmakers don't need when they're starting out. See ya.